What does it feel like to be erased from your own family, only to discover that fate has a way of rewriting the story? For Clara Hensley, this question wasn't just a fleeting thought, it was the wound that defined her life. At 38, she carried the weight of years spent trying to belong, only to be cast aside by the very people she called family. But sometimes, the universe has a way of balancing the scales, and Clara's story was far from over. Clara grew up in the shadow of the Hensley estate, a sprawling mansion in the heart of Virginia's wine country. Her father, Edward Hensley, was a man of wealth and charisma, a vineyard tycoon whose laughter could fill a room. Her mother, Margaret, had passed when Clara was 9, leaving her to navigate a world of privilege that never quite felt like hers. Her stepmother, Vivian, and her 2 stepsisters, Elise and Margot, entered the picture when Clara was 12, and with them came a coldness that seeped into her bones. They were a family in name only, bound by Edward's insistence on unity, but fractured by Vivian's disdain. Clara was the odd one out, the quiet girl with her mother's eyes and none of her father's favor. The dinner that changed everything happened on a crisp autumn evening. Clara had driven 3 hours from her modest apartment in Richmond to attend the annual Hensley family gathering. She arrived with a bottle of Merlot from her father's vineyard, a small gesture to bridge the gap between her and the family she still hoped to win over. The dining room was a vision of opulence, crystal chandeliers, mahogany furniture, and a table laden with roasted pheasant and vintage wines. But as Clara took her seat, she felt the familiar chill. Vivian's smile was thin, Elise's eyes darted away, and Margot didn't bother to hide her smirk. Halfway through the meal, Vivian clinked her glass, silencing the room. "Clara," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth, "we've been discussing things, and it's time we address the truth. You've been a burden on this family for too long. Your father's generosity has stretched thin, and frankly, we can't keep carrying you." The words landed like a blade. Clara's fork froze midair. Elise and Margot nodded in agreement, their faces masks of practiced pity. Edward, seated at the head of the table, stared at his plate, saying nothing. A burden. Clara's voice trembled, but she forced herself to meet Vivian's gaze. "I've never asked for anything. I've worked for everything I have." Vivian's laugh was sharp. "Worked? You live in that dingy apartment, scraping by, while we maintain the Hensley legacy. You're not part of this, Clara. You never were." Before Clara could respond, Vivian gestured toward the door. "It's best you leave now." The room spun. Clara looked to her father, waiting for him to intervene, to defend her as he once had when she was a child. But Edward's silence was deafening. Humiliation burned in her chest as she stood, grabbed her coat, and walked out into the night, the door slamming shut behind her. The Merlot she'd brought sat forgotten on the table, a symbol of her rejected offering. Clara drove home in a daze, tears blurring the road. She replayed every moment of her life with the Hensley-Severy slight, every dismissal, every time she convinced herself it was her fault. By the time she reached her apartment, she was hollowed out, but a spark of defiance flickered within her. She wouldn't beg for their love anymore. She was done. Weeks passed, and Clara threw herself into her work as a librarian, finding solace in the quiet stacks of books. She didn't hear from her family, and she didn't reach out. But then a letter arrived, its wax seal bearing the Hensley crest. Her father had died suddenly a heart attack, the letter said. The will would be read in a week, and her presence was requested. Clara's first instinct was to toss the letter into the trash, but something stopped her. Closure, perhaps, or curiosity. She wasn't sure. The reading took place in the same dining room where she'd been banished. Clara sat at the far end of the table, her hands clasped tightly to keep them from shaking. Vivian, Elise, and Margot were there, dressed in black but radiating confidence, as if the outcome was already decided. The lawyer, a wiry man named Mr. Grayson, adjusted his glasses and began. The will was straightforward at first. The vineyard and its profits went to Vivian, as expected. Elise and Margot each received substantial trusts. Clara braced herself for nothing, for the final confirmation that she was invisible. But then Mr. Grayson paused, his eyes flicking to her. "There's one more item," he said. "A codicil, added by Edward Hensley 3 months ago." Vivian's smile faltered. Elise leaned forward, her brow furrowed. Margot muttered something under her breath. Clara's heart pounded. The lawyer cleared his throat. "To my daughter, Clara Hensley, I leave the deed to Willow Creek, the original vineyard that started our family's legacy, along with its surrounding land and the cottage. Additionally, I leave her my personal collection of rare books, to be kept or sold at her discretion. Clara, I know I failed you. This is my attempt to make it right." The room erupted. Vivian slammed her hand on the table. "This is absurd. Willow Creek is worth millions. She's not even his real family." Elise and Margot joined in, their voices a cacophony of outrage. Clara sat frozen, the words sinking in. Willow Creek wasn't just land, it was the heart of the Hensley Empire, the vineyard her mother had helped build before her death. And the books? Her father had known her love for literature, even if he'd never said it aloud. But the twist came not from the will itself, but from a figure who stepped into the room unannounced. It was Mrs. Lottie, the family's housekeeper for over 30 years, a woman Clara had always considered a quiet ally. Her silver hair was pulled back, her eyes sharp with purpose. "If I may," she said, her voice steady, "I have something to add." Vivian snapped. "This is a private matter, Lottie." But Mr. Grayson nodded. "Mrs. Lottie was a witness to the codicil. She has the right to speak." Lottie's gaze settled on Clara. "Your father came to me last spring after a fight with Vivian. He was sick, Clara, sicker than anyone knew. He told me he regretted letting you drift away, that he'd let Vivian's influence cloud his judgment. He wrote that codicil in secret, and he asked me to keep this." She pulled a small envelope from her pocket and handed it to Clara. Inside was a letter in her father's handwriting. It read, "Clara, you were always your mother's daughter, strong, kind, and true. I was too weak to stand up for you, but I hope this gives you the home you deserve. Forgive me." Tears streamed down Clara's face as she read, her heart torn between grief and gratitude. Vivian and her daughters stormed out, vowing to contest the will, but Clara barely noticed. She clutched the letter, feeling her father's love for the first time in years. Mrs. Lottie placed a hand on her shoulder. "He saw you, Clara, even when you thought he didn't." In the months that followed, Clara moved to Willow Creek. The cottage was small but warm, filled with her father's books and memories of her mother. The vineyard, though neglected, hummed with potential. Clara poured herself into restoring it, hiring local workers and learning the craft her mother once loved. She didn't need the Hensley mansion or its wealth. She had something better place to belong, a legacy to rebuild, and a truth that no one could take away. Karma, it seemed, had spoken, not in vengeance, but in justice. Clara had been cast out, called a burden, but in the end, she was the one who carried her family's heart forward. And as she stood among the vines, watching the sunset paint the sky, she knew she was finally home.